you'll hear the story of the most terrifying genius in history, a man born in hunger who killed his own brother over a fish, a man who was enslaved before enslaving half the known world. This was Temujin. The name you know is Genghis Khan. Under his command, entire cities vanished from the map. Rivers were bent to drown populations. And yet, he also declared every child legitimate, banned the kidnapping of women, and granted religious freedoms centuries before Europe would. How could one life hold such opposites? Murderer and lawgiver, destroyer and builder. That's what makes him unforgettable. And tonight, you'll hear 20 of the strangest, darkest, most unbelievable truths about the man whose empire grew larger than Rome and whose bloodline still runs through millions alive today. So settle in. Let the fire of the Mongolian plains crackle in the background of your mind. Let the rhythm of hooves fade into your breathing, and as you drift, story by story, fact by fact, you'll discover why Genghis Khan's shadow still falls across history, and perhaps across you. Picture this. It's 1176, somewhere on the frozen steppes of Mongolia, where survival isn't guaranteed, and winter can kill you in a dozen different ways. Meet 14-year-old Temujin, a scrawny teenager with calloused hands and hollow cheeks, whose world got torn apart when rival Tatars poisoned his father 5 years earlier. This isn't the boy who'll become Genghis Khan, the man who'll conquer half the known world. Right now, he's just a starving teenager watching his family struggle to survive one frozen day at a time. So what's happening? His own tribe, the people who swore loyalty to his father, abandoned them years ago. Picture 7 kids and their mother left to fend for themselves on the most unforgiving landscape on earth. They're reduced to fishing, hunting small game, and scraping together whatever food they can find just to survive another day. The drama unfolds like this. Temujin and his brothers are fishing together when they catch a bright, shining fish. His half-brother Bekta, who's older and stronger, snatches the fish away from Temujin and his full brother Kasa. In today's terms, imagine your older stepbrother constantly taking food from your plate during a family crisis, claiming he deserves it more because of his age. This is where things get interesting. Bekta has been doing this for years, taking the best portions of whatever food they find, claiming authority over the family. But here's what makes this crazy. In their harsh world, whoever controls the food controls everything. The stakes couldn't be higher. Put yourself in Temujin's shoes. You've watched your half-brother steal food from you and your younger siblings for years while your family slowly starves. The internal struggle is real. This isn't just about one fish. It's about who gets to survive and who gets to lead what's left of their broken family. Temujin storms out in rage. He and his brother, Kasa, grab their bows and decide it's time for payback. They find Bekta watching over the horses, approach him from both sides with arrows drawn. As they aim at him, Bekta sees them coming and says something that cuts deep. Why make me dirt in your eye, a fishbone in your mouth? Don't destroy our family completely. The truth becomes crystal clear in one violent moment. Despite Bekta's final plea, Temujin and Kasa shoot him down. They watch their half-brother bleed out into the Mongolian soil, then walk away. Just like that, a 14-year-old boy commits his first murder, not out of evil, but out of desperate calculation for survival. Think about what's going through that teenager's head as he watches his half-brother die. Most of us can't imagine making life or death decisions at 14. But for Temujin, this moment teaches him something profound. When survival is on the line, even family can become your enemy. How does a desperate teenager with blood on his hands become the most feared conqueror in human history? The answer starts with understanding that sometimes the people closest to you pose the greatest threat. Funny how quickly your reputation can travel across an empty wasteland. It's 1177, and 14-year-old Temujin is about to learn that killing your half-brother comes with consequences. Not moral consequences. We're talking about practical, immediate, oh shit, here they come consequences. The Taichud riders appear on the horizon like a bad omen. These are his father's old allies, the same people who abandoned his family when times got tough. Now they're back, and they're not here to apologize or offer help. They've heard about Bekta, and they've decided that a kid who kills family members might grow up to be problematic. Here's the thing about the steppes. There's nowhere to hide. No forests, no caves, no convenient rivers to dive into. Just endless grass and sky. Which means when trouble comes looking for you, it tends to find you pretty quickly. Temujin doesn't run. Maybe he's too proud. Maybe he's too tired. Or maybe he already understands something that most teenagers don't. Sometimes you have to let bad things happen to you so you can learn how to prevent them later. The Taichud slap a wooden collar around his neck called a kang. Think of it as medieval handcuffs that also double as a billboard advertising your shame. Temujin can walk around, he can work, but he can't use his hands properly. And everyone who sees him knows he's somebody's property now. Most kids would break under this kind of humiliation. But something interesting happens to Temujin during his captivity. Instead of despair, he develops patience. Instead of rage, he cultivates observation. He's watching how his captors relax their guard, noting their routines, memorizing their weaknesses. The irony is delicious. The Taichuds think they're solving a problem by enslaving this dangerous boy. What they're actually doing is giving him a masterclass in how power works, how chains can be broken, and how the right moment changes everything. But here's what makes this whole situation even more twisted. They keep calling him by his birth name, Temujin, like it's some kind of joke. They have no idea that this name, this identity he was born with, carries a destiny that will reshape the entire world. What's in a name? Sometimes it's everything. Names have power, but sometimes you don't realize just how much power until the world starts treating you like your name predicted. It's 1162, and somewhere along the Onon River, a baby is born clutching a blood clot in his tiny fist. His parents look at this omen, look at the defeated Tatar warrior they just named him after, and decide to call him Temujin. In their language, it means of iron or blacksmith. Now here's what makes this absolutely wild. In the Mongol world, calling someone a blacksmith isn't an insult. It's basically calling them a wizard. These are the guys who turn raw metal into weapons, who possess skills that seem almost magical to nomadic herders. Blacksmiths are so important that some believe they're connected to shamanic powers. Think about it this way. Imagine naming your kid Tech Genius and then watching them actually revolutionize technology. That's essentially what happened here. Except instead of computers, we're talking about conquest and empire building. But here's the delicious irony. Young Temujin probably had no idea his name was basically a prophecy. While he's getting beaten down by life, enslaved by his own people, and struggling to survive, everyone's calling him Iron Man or Blacksmith. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. The Mongols had this belief that names shape destiny. They thought calling someone Iron would make them strong and unbreakable. What they didn't anticipate was just how literally this would come true. This scrawny, enslaved teenager would eventually forge an empire the way a blacksmith forges weapons, with heat, pressure, and an understanding of how to bend the world to his will. Even decades later, when European travelers heard stories about the great conqueror, they thought Genghis Khan had literally been a blacksmith before becoming emperor. The name stuck so powerfully that people couldn't separate the man from what he was called. The boy named Iron would eventually escape his chains, unite the warring tribes, and become Genghis Khan. But the most genius part of his empire building wouldn't be the military conquests. It would be the systems he created to hold it all together. Sometimes the greatest innovations come from the most practical minds. What do you do when you control more territory than anyone in history? You figure out how to actually manage it. Picture running the world's largest empire and realizing you've got a serious communication problem. It's around 1230, and Genghis Khan, Genghis Khan's son and successor, is sitting in his tent, looking at a map that stretches from Korea to Hungary. His father conquered this massive empire, but now Genghis has to actually run it. Messages sent on horseback from one end to the other would take months to arrive, assuming the messenger doesn't get eaten by wolves, killed by bandits, or just give up and become a farmer somewhere. This is where most rulers would throw up their hands and say, "Guess we'll rule through chaos and hope for the best." But Genghis Khan takes his father's rough communication networks and does something that would make Amazon's logistics team weep with envy. He creates the world's first express delivery service. Meet the Yam, a postal system so advanced it makes medieval Europe's communication methods look like smoke signals. While Genghis Khan had set up some basic relay points, Genghis transforms this into a continent-spanning marvel. Think of it as the internet, except instead of fiber optic cables, it runs on horsepower and sheer determination. Here's how this genius system works. Every 20 to 40 miles across the entire empire, there's a relay station stocked with fresh horses, food, and shelter. A messenger gallops up to a station, hands off his message to the next rider, grabs some food, and lets the fresh guy take over. It's like a relay race, except the baton is imperial commands, and the prize is keeping a continent-sized empire from falling apart. The numbers are absolutely insane. By the end of Kublai Khan's rule, there are over 1,400 stations just in China alone, with 50,000 horses, thousands of oxen, mules, boats, and even sheep. Messengers can cover 200 to 300 kilometers per day. In the 13th century, when most people think traveling 20 miles is an epic journey. But here's what makes this truly wild. These aren't just mailmen. These are elite couriers carrying special badges called Peasant that basically say, "Get out of my way or the Khan will turn you into a decorative rug." They wear bells on their belts so stations can hear them coming and have fresh horses ready. It's like medieval Formula One, except the cars are horses, and losing means potentially triggering a war. The real kicker? This system is so efficient that it won't be matched until the telegraph arrives centuries later. While European kings are still relying on random messengers and prayers, the Mongols have created something that operates like clockwork across an entire continent. But this postal system was just building on something revolutionary that Genghis Khan himself had figured out. If you want to rule a massive, diverse empire, you need more than just military might and fast horses. You need to understand how to keep millions of different people from wanting to kill you in the first place. And Genghis Khan's solution to that problem was absolutely shocking for a man known as history's greatest destroyer. Imagine the most unlikely person to champion religious freedom, and you'd probably never land on the guy who turned entire cities into ash piles. Yet here we are, talking about Genghis Khan becoming history's most unlikely saint of religious tolerance. Not because he had some divine revelation or read the right philosophy book, but because he discovered something much simpler. Persecution creates excellent spies. It starts in 1218 when a group of desperate Muslims shows up at his camp. They're fleeing from Kutlug, a Christian ruler who's been making their lives miserable for having the wrong god. Most conquerors would either ignore them or use them as cannon fodder. Genghis Khan sees an opportunity. These aren't just refugees. They're intelligence gold mines. They know Kutlug's weaknesses, his defenses, his routines. Better yet, they're motivated. Nothing makes someone more eager to help you destroy their oppressor than being oppressed. So Genghis Khan does something unprecedented. He guarantees them protection and religious freedom. Then he rides out, kills Kutlug, and declares that everyone in the conquered territory can worship however they want. The grateful Muslims start calling him defender of religions and one of the mercies of the Lord. The light bulb moment hits him like a war club to the skull. Religious persecution is terrible business strategy. From that point forward, his empire becomes the ancient world's first truly diverse religious marketplace. Buddhist monks, Christian priests, Muslim imams, Taoist sages, they all get tax exemptions and protection. He even hosts religious debates for entertainment, like medieval intellectual cage matches. Of course, he's not perfect. He still bans some Islamic and Jewish practices when they clash with the Mongol customs. But compared to the Crusades happening in Europe at the same time, his empire looks like a utopia of tolerance. The beautiful irony is that the world's most famous destroyer becomes its most effective protector of faith, not through enlightenment, but through pure pragmatism. Sometimes the best humanitarian policies come from the most selfish motivations. But if you think his stance on religion was surprising, wait until you hear about his policy on protecting women, especially considering what some rivals did to his own wife. There's something darkly ironic about a warlord who conquers the world, then decides kidnapping is where he draws the line. But that's exactly what happened when Genghis Khan banned the kidnapping of women across his entire empire. Not because he read some enlightened philosophy about women's rights, but because he knew exactly how it felt to have the person you love ripped away from you. It starts in 1178, just after Temujin marries his childhood sweetheart Berta. Picture this. They're barely settled into married life when the Merkits, a rival tribe with a serious grudge, attack at dawn and snatch her away. Not as a random act of violence, but as payback. You see, Temujin's father had kidnapped his mother from a Merkit man years earlier. This is their revenge. For 8 months, Berta disappears into the vast steppes. 8 months where Temujin doesn't know if she's alive, dead, or suffering. 8 months where his bed was made empty and his breast was torn apart, as he later described it. Most men in his position would cut their losses and find another wife. Bride kidnapping was so common in the 12th century Mongolia, it was basically like getting a telemarketing call during dinner. But Temujin does something unprecedented. He launches a full-scale rescue mission. He rallies his blood brother Jamukha and the powerful Tokhril Khan, convincing them to lend him 20,000 warriors for what's essentially a personal vendetta. They ride into Merkit territory like an ancient special forces unit, scatter the tribe to the winds, and get Berta back. But here's the twist that haunts their relationship forever. When Berta returns, she's pregnant. 8 months of captivity, and now there's a child on the way who might be Temujins or might belong to her captor. Their firstborn son Joki grows up under a cloud of suspicion, with people whispering stranger behind his back. This experience burns something deep into Temujin's soul. When he becomes Genghis Khan and starts making laws for his empire, one of the first things he does is ban the kidnapping and selling of women. No exceptions, no traditional excuses. If you want a wife, you negotiate like a civilized person. The irony is breathtaking. The man who will destroy entire cities and slaughter millions becomes one of history's first rulers to legally protect women from abduction. Sometimes the most personal trauma creates the most revolutionary changes. But protecting women from kidnapping is just one side of Genghis Khan's complicated relationship with family. Wait until you hear what he did about legitimacy in children. You know what solves the problem of questionable paternity? Just declare that paternity doesn't matter. That's exactly what Genghis Khan did when he created one of history's most radical family policies. All children are legitimate, no matter how they were conceived. No exceptions, no asterisks, no whispered questions about who their real father might be. This wasn't some progressive social theory he picked up from reading philosophy books. This was pure personal survival strategy, born from watching his own family get torn apart by legitimacy questions. Remember Joki, Genghis Khan's firstborn son who was conceived during Berta's 8 months of captivity. The kid grows up with people constantly whispering stranger behind his back. His own brother Chagatai openly challenges his right to inherit, calling him a merkit bastard. Family dinners must have been absolutely delightful. But here's where Genghis Khan does something brilliant. Instead of letting this legitimacy drama destroy his family, he makes it irrelevant for everyone. He writes it into the Yasa law code that all children born within the empire are considered legitimate heirs, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. Think about how revolutionary this is for the 13th century. While European nobles are obsessing over bloodlines and bastard children are getting shut out of inheritance, Genghis Khan is basically saying, if you're born, you count. Period. This isn't just about being nice to kids. It's strategic genius. In a world where women get kidnapped and conquests create complex family situations, having a bunch of illegitimate children running around creates endless succession disputes and civil wars. But if every child is legitimate, problem solved. The policy also serves his empire perfectly. When Mongol warriors conquer new territories and have children with local women, those kids automatically become full citizens with full rights. It's basically a built-in integration system that helps assimilate conquered peoples into Mongol society. Plus, it eliminates one of the traditional sources of tribal conflict. No more fighting over whose kids get to inherit what. No more family feuds over legitimacy. Just one simple rule. All children matter equally. The irony is beautiful. The man who may have struggled with questions about his own son's paternity becomes history's first ruler to legally declare that paternity doesn't determine worth. Sometimes the most personal pain creates the most universal solutions. But equal treatment of children is just one way Genghis Khan revolutionized traditional combat. Wait until you hear about his signature military tactic that turned cowardice into an art form. You know that moment in a horror movie when the monster suddenly stops chasing you? That's when you should really start panicking. Genghis Khan figured this out centuries before anyone invented horror films. While every other army in the world was teaching their soldiers to fight harder, stand firmer, and never retreat, he was perfecting the art of running away so well that it became more deadly than charging forward. The feigned retreat wasn't just a military tactic. It was psychological warfare that turned human instincts against themselves. Think about it. When someone runs from you, every fiber of your being screams, "Chase them." It's hardwired into us from thousands of years of hunting. Genghis Khan weaponized that instinct. Picture some poor Jin dynasty general in 1211, feeling pretty smug about his mountain fortress. The Mongols attack, fail miserably, and start retreating. They're even dropping gold and weapons in their desperation to escape. What do? You chase them, obviously. This is your moment of glory, except it's actually your moment of death. The fleeing Mongols suddenly stop, turn around and smile. That's when you realize the main army was hiding behind those hills, and you've just led your entire force into a killing field. The chroniclers later wrote that bodies piled up like rotten logs, which is probably the most poetic way anyone has ever described a massacre. The genius wasn't just the tactics. It was understanding that pride makes people stupid. Every general thinks they're smarter than everyone else. Every army believes they can spot a real retreat from a fake one. Genghis Khan made a career out of being wrong about that. At the Khalkha River, his generals led Russian and Kipchak armies on a 9-day chase across 200 miles. 9 days of thinking they were winning. 9 days of getting more exhausted and spread out. 9 days of walking deeper into a trap. When it finally sprung, the slaughter was so complete that barely anyone survived to tell the story. The beautiful cruelty of it all was that it required enemies to defeat themselves. Genghis Khan didn't need to be stronger or faster. He just needed to be more patient and better at reading people. Sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't a sword or an arrow. Sometimes it's just knowing exactly what your enemy wants to do and letting them do it. But here's the terrifying reality. All these brilliant mind games and clever strategies served one ultimate purpose: the systematic elimination of anyone who refused to submit. And the scale of that elimination was unlike anything the world had ever seen. When people say someone changed the world, they usually mean they changed how we think or live. When they say it about Genghis Khan, they mean he actually made fewer people exist in the world. We're talking about so much death that scientists can still see it today in ice from the North Pole. When researchers looked at really old ice, they found something crazy. Around the year 1200, the air had less carbon in it. Why? Because so many people died that huge areas of farmland turned back into forests, and forests suck carbon out of the air. Genghis Khan killed about 40 million people. That's 11 out of every 100 people alive at the time. To help you understand how huge that is, World War II killed about 2 out of every 100 people on Earth. The Mongol Wars were 4 times worse than the deadliest war in recent history. The numbers get really scary when you look at specific places. In what we now call Iran, historians think 3 out of every 4 people died. That's like if your town had 1,000 people and only 250 were left alive. Some places didn't get their population back until the 1900s. That's 700 years later. But here's the really scary part. This wasn't an accident. Genghis Khan had a system for killing lots of people. When the city of Nishapur killed his favorite son-in-law, his daughter asked him to kill every single person in that city, and he did it. Persian writers say they killed over 1.7 million people there, though today's experts aren't sure if the city even had that many people. The Mongol plan was simple but terrifying. They'd give cities 2 choices: give up and live, or fight and everyone dies. Those who gave up joined the empire. Those who fought became examples to scare other cities. It worked. Word spread that entire cities were wiped out. so other places would surrender without fighting. How do you actually kill that many people with old-time weapons? The Mongols were organized about it. They'd give each soldier a job. You kill this many people, you kill that many people. Persian records say 50,000 Mongol soldiers each had to kill 24 civilians in one city. That's 1.2 million deaths from just one battle. The effect on nature was huge. As cities were abandoned and farms turned back into forests, about 684 million tons of carbon got sucked out of the air. Genghis Khan's wars actually made the planet cooler. The weird thing is that this same man who killed so many people also made laws to protect children and help people live better lives. Sometimes the most confusing leaders have the biggest impact. But killing millions was just one thing Genghis Khan was good at. His next trick showed that he understood something really smart about how to keep armies strong for a long time. You know how some people complain about airplane food? Mongol warriors would have laughed at that problem, mainly because they figured out how to turn their transportation into their meal plan. Picture this. You're a 13th century soldier, and your commanding officer just told you that dinner tonight is whatever's currently carrying you to battle. Most armies would mutiny. The Mongols just reached for their knives and got creative. When supplies ran low during those endless rides across the Asian steppes, Mongol warriors would make a small cut in their horse's neck and drink its blood. Not enough to hurt the animal, just enough to keep themselves alive for another day or two. It's like the world's first energy drink, except it came with hooves and a mane. But wait, it gets weirder. They also drank fermented mare's milk, which was basically nature's version of a protein shake mixed with alcohol. So when these terrifying horsemen came thundering toward your city walls, they were often mildly buzzed on horse dairy products. Talk about liquid courage. This wasn't just about weird dietary choices. It was about completely rewriting the rules of warfare. While European armies were crawling across the countryside at 20 miles per day, weighed down by massive supply trains, the Mongols were covering 100 miles in the same time by essentially carrying their kitchen with them. The genius was in the simplicity. Each warrior had 3 or 4 horses, so while one was being ridden, the others were resting, staying fresh, and occasionally serving as a mobile restaurant. It meant the Mongol army could appear anywhere, anytime, without warning. Marco Polo was fascinated by this system. He wrote about how a Mongol could survive for 10 days without lighting a fire or eating cooked food, just by living off his horses. It made them seem almost supernatural to their enemies. An army that didn't need normal human things like rest stops or supply lines. Imagine being a town guard and hearing that an unstoppable force is approaching that doesn't follow any of the normal rules of how armies work. They don't need to stop, they don't need supply lines, and they definitely don't need your permission to show up whenever they feel like it. But survival skills and logistics were just the beginning of how Genghis Khan broke all the conventional rules. Wait until you hear about his approach to something that most rulers of his time couldn't even do themselves. Nothing quite humbles a world conqueror like realizing he can't read the surrender letters from the cities he just destroyed. Genghis Khan faced this exact problem around 1204. Here he was, building the largest empire in human history, and he couldn't even scribble his own name. Most rulers would just hire scribes and call it a day. But Genghis Khan decided to do something that would make every literacy advocate proud. He didn't just learn to read, he created reading for his entire people. The opportunity came when he captured a Uyghur scribe named Tata Tonga after defeating the Naiman tribe. While most conquerors would have just used the guy to translate threatening letters, Genghis Khan had a light bulb moment that would change everything. Picture this conversation. So Tatatonga, your people have this writing thing figured out. Yes, my lord. And it works for running an empire. Very well, my lord. Excellent. Teach my people to do that, but make it work for Mongolian. But my lord, we'd need to adapt the entire system. Figure it out. And somehow, Tatatonga did. He took the Uyghur script, which was already pretty weird because it ran from top to bottom instead of side to side, and made it work for the Mongolian language. It was like taking someone else's alphabet and jury-rigging it to fit completely different sounds and grammar. The beauty was in its simplicity. Instead of the thousands of Chinese characters that took years to master, this was just an alphabet. A few dozen letters, and you could write anything. Genghis Khan immediately saw the genius in this and ordered Tatatonga to start teaching his sons and officials. Soon, they were writing down everything: laws, battle plans, tax records, and eventually the most important document in Mongolian history, the secret history of the Mongols, which tells Genghis Khan's entire life story. The irony is delicious. A man who couldn't read created the writing system that preserved his own legend. The oldest surviving piece of Mongolian writing is called the Genghis Stone, and it commemorates his nephew making an incredibly long arrow shot during a party. Even their first written monument was basically ancient bragging rights. What makes this truly remarkable is the long-term thinking. Genghis Khan understood that spoken stories get twisted over time, but written records stick around. By creating Mongolian literacy, he was essentially ensuring his empire's legacy would outlast everyone who personally knew him. 800 years later, that writing system is still used in parts of China, and Mongolia is working to bring it back officially. Not bad for a homework assignment from an illiterate warlord. But creating literacy was just one way Genghis Khan planned for the future. His next innovation would solve a problem that still drives modern city planners absolutely crazy. You know that feeling when someone disrespects you so completely that you fantasize about erasing them from existence? Most people just imagine it. Genghis Khan actually figured out how to do it. This is the story of what happens when you insult the wrong person, and that person happens to control the largest army in the world and has a very creative approach to problem solving. It starts innocently enough. Genghis Khan sends a trade caravan to the Khwarezmian Empire, 500 merchants with goods, basically an ancient business delegation. The governor of Outlawed decides they're spies and kills them all. Mistake number one. Genghis Khan, showing more patience than most people would, sends diplomats to sort this out peacefully. The Khwarezmian Shah responds by beheading one ambassador and shaving the heads of the other two before sending them home. Mistake number two. Most rulers would have just invaded and conquered the empire. Genghis Khan did that too. But he also did something that still gives urban planners cold sweats. He decided to make the Shah's birthplace disappear forever. Not just destroy it, not just burn it down, literally remove it from the map so completely that future generations would have no idea a city had ever been there. So he diverted an entire river to flow over the spot where the city used to be. Picture the conversation with his engineers. Can we make a city not exist anymore? Well, my lord, maybe we could try. I don't care how. Make it happen. The result was something out of a nightmare. Where there used to be streets, houses, markets, and thousands of people living their daily lives, there was now just water flowing peacefully over empty ground. The city became a river bottom. It's hard to comprehend the psychological impact of this. Imagine being from a neighboring city and hearing that your powerful neighbor didn't just get conquered. It got turned back into nature, as if it had never existed. But here's what separates Genghis Khan from other conquerors. Even in his darkest moments of destruction, he was already thinking about what came next. The same mind that could erase cities was simultaneously building something revolutionary, a society where your birth didn't determine your ceiling. In most of the world in the 1200s, the family you were born into decided your whole life. Peasants stayed peasants, nobles stayed nobles. That was the rule, almost everywhere, but not in Genghis Khan's empire. Meet Jebi. His birth name was Zurgadai, and unlike the princes and khans of the steppe, he came from humble origins. No famous clan, no noble blood, just another ordinary warrior trying to survive. Here's where his story takes a wild turn. During a battle against Genghis Khan, Zurgadai fired an arrow that struck and possibly killed Genghis's horse. In any other kingdom, that would have been a death sentence. But when the fight was over and Genghis demanded to know who had done it, Zurgadai stepped forward and confessed. Genghis didn't punish him. He rewarded him. He gave Zurgadai a new name, Jebi, meaning arrow, and made him one of his commanders. Think about how insane that looked to other rulers of the time. Imagine a king's soldier breaking the king's most prized possession, and instead of being executed, he's promoted. That was Genghis's logic. Anyone who can shoot that well should be fighting with me, not against me. This moment wasn't just about forgiveness. It showed Genghis Khan's greatest strength. He valued ability above birth. If you proved your courage, your loyalty, or your brilliance, you could rise, whether you were a herdsman or a blacksmith. And Jebi did rise. Alongside the legendary General Subutai, Jebi led campaigns across Asia that terrified entire kingdoms. From Persia to the Caucasus, his tactics, like the famous feigned retreat, shattered armies many times larger than his own. Even today, military historians still study his maneuvers. For the people inside Genghis's empire, this was a revolution. Talent and loyalty could outweigh bloodlines. A common man could dream of becoming a general. That sense of possibility supercharged Mongol ambition, and it turned a once broken tribe into a force that would soon break empires. Most rulers in history relied on the same old tricks. Build bigger walls, throw more soldiers at them, maybe starve a city into surrender. But Genghis Khan didn't think like other rulers. When his armies couldn't break your defenses, he didn't just keep banging on the gates. He looked around and asked, "What else can I turn into a weapon?" And sometimes the answer was nature itself. One of the most chilling examples comes from the Persian campaigns. After years of resistance, a city stood defiant behind its massive stone walls, convinced the Mongols couldn't touch them. They had food, water, and high ground. To them, Genghis's cavalry were terrifying in open battle, but useless against stone and mortar. That confidence didn't last. Genghis ordered his engineers and soldiers to dig channels and divert a river toward the city. Imagine being inside those walls, hearing the distant sound of shovels at first, thinking it was just another siege camp being built. Then the rumble of water. Then the roar. Suddenly, the river that once gave life to the fields was crashing into the gates. Within hours, the moat turned into a flood. Within days, entire streets vanished under rushing water. Houses collapsed, walls cracked, and people drowned where they stood. The defenders, who thought stone would save them, were swept away by the very earth they trusted to protect them. This was more than destruction. It was theatre. Genghis wanted the world to see that he could turn nature itself into a weapon. Word of drowned cities spread like wildfire, and with it, the terror of resisting. Because if the Mongols could make rivers fight for them, what chance did any city really have? And here's the terrifying truth. This wasn't even close to the peak of his empire's power. Because while Rome once stretched across the Mediterranean, Genghis's empire was about to leap far beyond anything the ancient world had ever seen. For centuries, Rome was the empire everyone pointed to. They had their legions, their marble roads, their aqueducts carrying water across miles of stone. Rome ruled from the hot deserts of North Africa to the cold forests of Britain, from Spain in the west to Syria in the east. At its peak, under Emperor Trajan, the Roman Empire stretched about 5 million square kilometers. To the ancient world, that was the ceiling of human power, bigger than anyone had ever seen. Bigger, many thought, than anyone could ever build. But then came Genghis Khan, the son of a steppe chieftain who lost everything, who once fought for scraps of food as an outcast. This man would redefine the word empire. By the time his children and grandchildren carried his vision across continents, the Mongol Empire dwarfed Rome. 24 million square kilometers, the largest contiguous empire in human history, nearly 5 times the size of Rome. Picture a map of the world. Rome is impressive, yes, but it hugs the Mediterranean. Now zoom out and trace the Mongol Empire. It covers almost the entire spine of Eurasia, from the Pacific coast of Korea to the edge of Poland and Hungary, from the frozen forests of Siberia down into the warm valleys of Persia and the Middle East. No empire before or since has stitched so much land into one continuous domain. And then there's the people. Rome's population at its height was maybe 50 to 70 million. That's huge for the ancient world. But the Mongols ruled nearly 100 million. Different languages, different gods, different customs, all crushed or absorbed under Mongol authority. Imagine the chaos and the wonder of that. A peasant farmer in China, a merchant in Persia, a soldier in Russia, all subjects of the same empire, bound together by the will of men on horseback from Mongolia. This is why the Mongols terrified and fascinated the world. They weren't just another great kingdom. They were proof that an empire could grow larger, faster, and stranger than anyone had ever imagined. Rome had been the benchmark. Genghis Khan smashed that benchmark into pieces. But here's the dark twist. It wasn't just about how big the Mongol Empire became. It was also about how it was built. Because Genghis Khan didn't treat all his enemies the same. Some were executed without mercy. Others, engineers, scholars, craftsmen, were spared, valued, and folded into his empire. And that brutal, selective logic shaped the way the Mongols ruled. By now, the world knew that Genghis Khan's empire was unstoppable. Cities fell like dominoes, and kingdoms crumbled under his cavalry. But here's something you might not expect. Not everyone was treated the same once the Mongols stormed through your gates. If you were a noble, an aristocrat, or a ruling family member, you were finished. Genghis Khan believed nobles were the root of rebellion. Leave them alive, and they'd scheme their way back to power. So the Mongols made it brutally simple. Eliminate them. Think of it like a company takeover, where the new CEO fires the entire old board of directors on day one. No second chances, no golden parachutes, gone. But if you were a craftsman, an engineer, a scholar who knew how to build, repair, or innovate, your life was spared. In fact, you were prized. Skilled workers were pulled from the ashes of burned cities and marched thousands of miles to serve the Mongol Empire. To Genghis, talent was too valuable to waste. It's a bit like a modern tech giant acquiring a startup, not because they want the brand, but because they want the engineers who can code the future. This ruthless selectivity had logic. Kill the power-hungry elites who might cause problems, but preserve the practical builders who could strengthen the empire. To the Mongols, this wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was efficiency, like cutting dead weight from an organization while keeping the talent that drives real results. And the message spread fast. Imagine watching your city fall, the nobles dragged out and executed, ordinary farmers and shopkeepers cut down in the chaos. But if you had a special skill, if you could cast metal like an expert welder, design bridges like a civil engineer, or even make weapons like a modern defense contractor, you might live, though as a captive, carried far from home to work for the conqueror. This was the paradox of Genghis Khan, destroyer and builder, firing half the company while promoting the engineers in the same breath. And soon, even his own story would reflect this contradiction, because when he died, the empire didn't crumble, it grew larger. Yet the man himself disappeared into mystery. No one knows where the greatest conqueror in history is buried. Every empire has a beginning, and every empire has an end. But when it comes to Genghis Khan himself, the end is wrapped in shadows. The most powerful man of the 13th century, the conqueror who redrew the map of the world, vanished into mystery the moment he died. The official records are vague, and the stories don't agree. Some say he fell from his horse while hunting, thrown to the ground in a tragic accident. Others whisper he was wounded in battle against the Western Shia dynasty and never recovered. Still others spin tales of assassination, that he was killed by an enemy princess who smuggled a weapon into his tent on their wedding night. No matter which version you hear, one fact remains. In 1227, the great Khan was dead. And yet, instead of turning his funeral into a display of power, the Mongols did something unthinkable. They buried him in complete secrecy. No mausoleum, no giant pyramid, no marble tomb like the Romans. His body was taken back toward Mongolia, hidden so well that no one, not friend, not foe, would ever disturb it. Imagine this in modern terms. The world's most powerful leader dies, and instead of a state funeral broadcast on every channel, there's silence. No cameras, no monuments, no grave to visit. Just a legend whispered across centuries. And that's why today, no one knows exactly where Genghis Khan lies. Archaeologists have searched Mongolia for decades. Satellites have scanned the steppes from orbit. Scholars argue over clues in ancient texts. But the grave of the man who built the largest land empire in history remains undiscovered. Of course, mystery never stays alone. Where there are unanswered questions, there are legends. And the legends say the Mongols went to terrifying lengths to make sure no one would ever find his grave. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, his burial was cloaked in secrecy. No grand tomb, no carved stone, no shrine for pilgrims to visit, just silence. But the silence bred stories, and the stories grew into legend. One of the most chilling tales says that as the funeral procession carried his body back to Mongolia, the soldiers slaughtered everyone who saw it. Villagers, travelers, even animals along the road. None could be allowed to know the path. The secrecy was absolute. And then comes the legend that refuses to die. Once his body was laid in the earth, 10,000 horses were driven over the site, trampling the land until no trace of a grave remained. Imagine the thunder of hooves, the ground shaking under endless riders, until the burial place looked no different from the steppe around it. To this day, no one has found it. Archaeologists have searched. Satellites have scanned from orbit. Explorers have scoured the mountains of Burkenkalden in Mongolia, a site sacred to the Khan, but the grave has never been discovered. Think of it in modern terms. The world's most powerful leader, someone who reshaped continents, buried so secretly that even with drones, satellites, and ground radar, we still can't find him. The most famous man of the 13th century has become history's greatest missing person. And here's the irony. While his body disappeared into legend, his empire lived on. And in the strangest of ways, it even shaped the world's taste buds. Because along those same roads that carried news of his death, Mongol armies carried something far sweeter. The recipe for ice cream. It almost sounds like a joke. How do you get from trampling graves with 10,000 horses to dessert? But that's the strange legacy of the Mongol Empire. When Genghis Khan's army swept across Asia, they didn't just carry fear and destruction. They carried ideas, inventions, and food. And one of those gifts to the world may have been ice cream. Here's how the story goes. The Mongols had a simple frozen treat. Milk mixed with snow from the mountains, churned and cooled in leather bags strapped to their horses as they rode. The constant shaking kept the mixture from freezing solid, turning it into something smooth, primitive ice cream. It wasn't the chocolate and vanilla you buy in tubs today, but in the 1200s, it was magic. Cold, sweet, refreshing, and completely new to most of the world. As Mongol influence spread westward, so did their foods. The recipe for frozen milk and snow is believed to have traveled through Persia, then to the Middle East, and eventually into Europe. By the Renaissance, frozen desserts had become a delicacy of kings, and it may never have happened without Genghis Khan's empire acting as the world's greatest delivery system. Think of it like this. The same network that moved silk, spices, and gunpowder also moved dessert. Imagine the shock of an Italian noble in the 1300s tasting frozen cream for the first time. To them, it was exotic, luxurious, and almost unthinkable. But to the Mongols, it was just something they had been making on horseback for decades. And if that legacy sounds surprising, wait until you hear the next one. Because while ice cream is sweet, what really lasted from Genghis Khan was bloodline. He fathered so many children that his DNA is still with us today. In nearly 1 out of every 200 men alive. Empires rise and fall. Cities crumble, maps change, monuments turn to dust. But Genghis Khan left behind something no conqueror could erase, his bloodline. Modern genetic studies have revealed something staggering. In 2003, a team of scientists discovered a genetic marker spread across Asia, carried by men from Mongolia to Afghanistan. When they traced it back, all the evidence pointed to a single origin about 800 years ago. The conclusion: this lineage likely came from Genghis Khan and his descendants. The scale is almost impossible to grasp. Roughly 1 in every 200 men alive today, about 16 million men worldwide, carry his DNA. Think about that. You might be sitting in an office walking through an airport, or waiting in line at the grocery store next to someone whose Y chromosome comes directly from Genghis Khan's family. How did this happen? Simple, brutal math. The Mongols didn't just conquer territory, they claimed people. Genghis Khan and his male descendants took countless wives and concubines as they expanded their empire. Over generations, that lineage spread, not just across Mongolia, but across Central Asia, Persia, and beyond. In modern terms, it's like one CEO's family business, scaling not to millions of dollars, but millions of descendants. His empire collapsed centuries ago, but his DNA empire never stopped growing. And that's the final twist of the story. The man whose grave has never been found, whose empire rewrote the map, still lives among us, not in marble statues or ruined cities, but in blood. Every time a new study confirms it, Genghis Khan steps out of history and back into the present, because empires may vanish, but genes can conquer time itself.